The pod hit the ground with a violent jolt, the impact sending a shockwave through Marcus's spine. For a moment, all he could hear was the ringing in his ears and the grinding sound of metal scraping against the earth. The interior of the pod was dim, lit only by flickering lights that illuminated the walls of the cramped capsule. His heart raced. The familiar hum of the pod system died away, and all that remained was the silence of the jungle outside. The door hissed open, and Marcus squinted against the sharp light that flooded in from the outside. A hot, sticky breeze hit him immediately, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation. He stepped out onto the alien soil, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, spongy ground. This was G431M, the survival exam planet, and if the first few seconds were any indication, this was not going to be easy. Rain hammered the canopy above, the sound almost deafening. The trees groaned under the weight of the downpour, their massive leaves trembling as the storm raged. The ground beneath his feet turned to mud, making every step a battle as Marcus fought to keep his balance. The air was humid, suffocating even, and Marcus's uniform clung to his skin. He took a deep breath, squinting up at the thick green sky. The weather, already volatile, was only the beginning. He had 30 days to survive with nothing but a basic survival kit and his wits. The pod had dropped him off with no map, no communication, and no real instruction. The instructors watched from orbit, observing how cadets like him fared in this unforgiving wilderness. Most cadets, he knew, didn't last a week. "All right," he muttered to himself, wiping the rain from his eyes. His hand trembled slightly, whether from nerves or the cold, he couldn't tell. "Let's get started." He surveyed his surroundings. The jungle was dense, with massive trees that reached far above him, their trunks thick and gnarled. Thick vines hung from the branches, twisting and curling like serpents. The ground was a tangled mess of roots, ferns, and underbrush, all soaking wet from the downpour. Despite the constant rain, the jungle was alive, buzzing with the hum of unseen creatures and the occasional distant roar of something massive. The alien wildlife of G431M, a planet uncolonized by any race, was unpredictable and dangerous. Marcus took his first few steps into the jungle, his boots squelching in the mud. He could hear something in the distance, a guttural, deep-throated howl that echoed through the trees. The sound sent a shiver down his spine. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of foliage being shredded. Something out there was moving, something large. The predator was announcing its presence. He ignored the instinct to panic. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, survival. Every movement, every decision counted. The first night was crucial. He had to find shelter before nightfall. Pushing forward through the thick jungle, Marcus made his way toward higher ground. He found a small clearing near a stream, its waters gurgling quietly. It didn't have the sulfurous stench of toxic runoff, which was a small victory in itself. He knelt by the stream, scooping water into his hands to drink. His stomach twisted, not yet accustomed to the alien landscape, but he didn't care. It was water, it was life. Marcus spent the next few hours building a makeshift shelter. The rain didn't let up, but he couldn't afford to wait. The bamboo-like stalks along the stream, fibrous and segmented, made the perfect material for walls and a roof. He used the vines he found to lash them together, and soon enough he had a basic structure, nothing fancy, but it would keep the rain out. For the first time since he landed, he allowed himself a brief moment of relief. As night fell, he started a small fire in a ring of stones he'd arranged earlier. It was rudimentary, but it was warmth, and it gave him light. He ate the nutrient bars from his survival pack, his stomach protesting the unfamiliar food. Afterward, he lay down on the cold ground beneath his shelter, wrapping himself in the tarp he'd managed to rig up. Sleep wouldn't come easily, but it didn't matter. The first day had been about survival. Tomorrow would be about figuring out how to make it through another day. But sleep never came. Marcus lay there in the dark, listening to the jungle around him. The howls of predators echoed through the night, louder now, closer. He tightened his grip on the knife in his hand and thought about the cadets back on the station, the ones who would already have tapped out. Most didn't make it. They couldn't handle the mental toll, the physical exhaustion, the constant threat of death. He wondered if he would be one of them. The wind picked up, howling through the trees. The sound was almost deafening, but somewhere beneath the noise, Marcus could hear something else. A rustling, soft but unmistakable. His pulse quickened. The predator, it was coming closer. Suddenly, a loud crash from the jungle. The ground shook beneath him. Marcus scrambled to his feet, heart pounding. It was right there. He didn't know what it was, but whatever it was massive, and it was coming straight for him. He grabbed his survival kit, slung it over his shoulder, and scrambled out of his shelter. His boots sunk deep into the mud, and the wind whipped his face as he moved toward the thick trees. He needed to get off the ground. He needed to hide. And then, with a final roar, the creature was gone, its footsteps echoing through the jungle as it disappeared into the night. Marcus stood there, breathless, his heart still hammering in his chest. It wasn't over. The test was just beginning. The night passed uneventfully after the creature's roar faded into the jungle, but Marcus didn't sleep. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig kept him on edge. He knew that the dangers of G431M weren't just confined to the daylight hours. As the sun began to rise, filtering through the thick canopy above, he decided he couldn't stay in one place for too long. Staying still meant becoming a target, and in the wilds of this alien world, that was a death sentence. Marcus quickly packed his things, taking one last glance at his makeshift shelter. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The bamboo walls were flimsy and the fire pit had already been doused by the rain. Still, it was shelter. For now, that would have to be enough. He made his way back to the stream, following it upstream to a rocky outcrop that would give him a better view of the surrounding jungle. As he moved through the underbrush, he noticed the eerie silence that had fallen over the jungle. The usual chorus of chirping insects and distant bird calls had quieted. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. There was no time to dwell on it. His focus remained on survival. He needed to secure food, fresh water, and a more permanent shelter. The stream had been his first priority, but now he needed to see what lay beyond the water's edge. After an hour of trekking through the damp undergrowth, Marcus spotted movement ahead, a flicker of shadow between the trees. He froze, instincts kicking in. A predator, a rival cadet. His hand went instinctively to the knife at his side. The figure stepped into view and Marcus's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a predator, but an alien, a cadet, judging by the tattered survival pack slung over her shoulder. She looked human at first glance, but her features were unmistakably alien. Her skin was a muted green and her limbs were elongated, with 3 fingers on each hand. Her eyes were wide and round, glowing faintly in the dim light, an unsettling shade of pale yellow. She didn't seem to notice Marcus at first, focused on something in her hand. It was a small plant which she appeared to be inspecting carefully. He took a few cautious steps forward, hoping not to startle her. "Hey," he called out, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. She whipped around, her eyes narrowing, and for a moment Marcus thought she might attack. But then she paused, studying him for a moment, her expression softening. "You're human," she said, her voice a strange mix of melodic and guttural. The words were clear but rough, as if she wasn't used to speaking the language. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I'm Marcus, you." "Rasha," she replied, giving a slight nod. She didn't seem hostile, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that she was wary. He could understand why. They were both strangers on this hostile planet, and trust didn't come easily when survival was at stake. Rasha stepped closer, glancing at his survival pack. "You look well," she observed, her eyes scanning the equipment he carried. "Better than most." Marcus gave a tired smile. "I'm used to this kind of stuff, military training." Rasha's face softened, and for a moment she seemed to relax. "You know how to survive here." "Getting there," Marcus said with a half-hearted chuckle. "I'm still figuring it out, but I've got a shelter set up nearby if you need somewhere to stay." Rasha hesitated. "I got lost, fell hurt." She pulled up her pant leg, revealing a jagged gash along her lower calf, already beginning to swell. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage she had tied around it. Marcus took a step closer, instinctively reaching into his pack for his medical supplies. "That looks bad, you should have treated it sooner." "I didn't think it was so deep," Rasha said, her voice tight, "but I can't walk well now." Marcus could see the fear in her eyes. It was clear she hadn't been alone long, and judging by the way she looked at him, she hadn't expected anyone to help her. "Here, let me clean it up," Marcus said, kneeling beside her. He worked quickly, using boiled water from his last filtered batch, and then wrapped the wound with a strip of cloth. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold for now. As he worked, Rasha watched him closely, her expression a mix of curiosity and wariness. When he finished, she gave a small nod, grateful but reserved. "You are different from the others." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "You trust me, you help me, others would have left me to die." Rasha's voice dropped, a flicker of something darker in her eyes. "Yeah, well," Marcus replied, giving a shrug, "I don't play like that, we're all in the same boat here." Rasha studied him for a moment longer before speaking again. "You build things, yes?" Marcus blinked. "I mean, yeah, I've made a shelter, figured out a few systems to get water." Rasha nodded slowly. "I saw what you built, the shelter and the fire. You are not like the others here." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "Most cadets," she said, her voice quiet, "focus only on surviving. They don't build, they don't try to make things easier, they wait for extraction. You're trying to make this place livable." Marcus hesitated. He hadn't thought about it that way, but now that she mentioned it, he realized that she was right. Most cadets just tried to make it through. They weren't concerned about the long haul, but that was never the way he'd thought. He didn't just want to survive, he wanted to live. "Yeah," he said finally, "I guess I am. Survival isn't just about existing, it's about making it work." Rasha gave him a small, approving smile. "I want to help, I can build, I can hunt." Marcus studied her carefully. "I could use all the help I can get." And just like that, an unspoken alliance formed between them. But even as they began to work together, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that their survival would be tested in ways they could. The following days passed in a blur of building, scavenging, and cautious exploration. Marcus and Rasha worked together, silently falling into an unspoken rhythm. Their alliance was born out of necessity, but over time it grew into something stronger. While Marcus had the experience of survival and leadership, Rasha brought a different kind of intelligence to the table, an innate understanding of the planet's ecology and its intricate systems. She could spot a vine that was edible from a distance, identify medicinal plants, and avoid dangerous wildlife without hesitation. By the end of the second day, Marcus had completed a small, functional shelter using the bamboo-like stalks that lined the stream. He'd fashioned a sturdy frame with interwoven vines for support and lined the floor with thick leaves and branches to keep the damp ground from seeping into their resting places. It was nothing like the comfort of home, but it would suffice for the time being. That night, as they sat around the small fire Marcus had managed to build from a combination of damp wood and the few dry twigs they could find, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the trees surrounding their shelter. Rasha sat across from him, her glowing eyes reflecting the firelight. She hadn't spoken much since they started working together, but he could sense the relief in her posture. The wound on her leg had already started to heal, and the food they'd managed to gather, roots, leaves, and small, foraged fruits, was providing them with enough energy to keep moving forward. Not bad for two people stuck in the middle of nowhere, Marcus said, breaking the silence. He took a slow sip from his canteen, watching the steam rise from the fire. I thought this was going to be a lot harder than it is. Rasha glanced at him, a slight smile tugging at her lips. You are an optimist. Maybe, Marcus admitted, or maybe I just like to keep busy. Rasha didn't respond right away, her gaze shifting to the night sky above. For a long time, the jungle was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of the leaves or the distant calls of creatures they hadn't yet seen. But in the stillness, Marcus could sense something shifting in the air. The oppressive weight of the jungle was lifting, replaced by the tension of something waiting to happen. We need to make it bigger, Rasha said, suddenly breaking the silence. Her voice was firm, almost resolute. This camp. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Bigger, we're already pushing the limits of what we can carry. You think we should build more? Not more, she said, glancing at the shelter and the fire pit. I think we should create something that lasts. A long pause followed as Marcus considered her words. He had already done the bare minimum: food, shelter, water, but what Rasha was suggesting was different. She wanted to build something that could endure. A real camp, not just a shelter, a place that would provide safety, security, a home even if only for a short time. Marcus stood up, stretching his sore muscles. His back ached from the long hours of working, but it was the kind of ache that came from progress. All right, he said, let's do it. We'll need more supplies, more manpower. I can't do it alone. Rasha stood as well, nodding. We'll need to find others. The next few days were spent fortifying their position. They ventured further into the jungle, collecting more materials. Bamboo, sturdy vines, and large leaves that could be used as roofing were all in high demand. They even found a large fallen log that they could hollow out to use as a makeshift water trough for the camp. By the fifth day, the shelter had grown into something far more than what it started as, a full-fledged camp built with practicality and a touch of creativity. The walls were reinforced with thicker bamboo poles lashed tightly together with vine. The floor was covered with leaves, making it more comfortable to sleep on. They built a separate area for cooking, a stone ring fire pit surrounded by rocks, and a simple but effective filtration system for water using cloth, gravel, and charcoal. But the camp was still lacking something. You know, Marcus said one evening as they sat around the fire, I think we need to make this place official. Rasha raised an eyebrow, her eyes flickering with curiosity. Official? Yeah, I mean, we've got shelter, food, water, a fire, but that's just survival, it's not living. I think we need a name. Rasha gave him a puzzled look. A name. Marcus nodded, gesturing to their camp. We've got a community here. It might be small, but it's a community. It needs a name, something to make it real. Rasha's eyes glowed faintly in the firelight as she considered his words. After a long pause, she finally spoke. Camp Chillax. Marcus chuckled, the sound deep and genuine. Camp Chillax, he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. Yeah, I like it. It has a ring to it. Rasha smiled, her first true smile since they'd met. It is simple, but it fits. With a name, the camp felt more solid, more real, and as the days passed, more cadets began to trickle in. Some stumbled upon it by accident, others by design. There was a chervil named Talk, a quiet, broad-shouldered species with scales that shimmered in the sunlight. He was the first to arrive and was quickly put to work. The second to come was Ervil, a Darishi, a species known for their martial prowess. He was injured, his arm in a sling, but even with that handicap, he immediately went to work, helping Marcus and Rasha reinforce the walls of the camp. Soon enough, Marcus had a group, a small one but a group nonetheless. They worked in harmony, their efforts guided by Marcus's leadership and Rasha's knowledge of the jungle. As each new cadet arrived, the camp expanded. The bamboo huts grew taller, the cooking area grew larger, and more resources were gathered to keep everyone fed and safe. And even imagine. Camp Chillax had grown. What started as a humble shelter was now a thriving base of operations, a true camp. With each passing day, Marcus found himself adapting more to this new rhythm of life. The work was never ending, but it was rewarding. His focus on survival had shifted to creating a sense of community. Each new day felt like another small victory, another step toward making this alien planet their temporary home. And through it all, Rasha remained by his side, her unwavering support a silent reminder of why they were both still here, alive and striving. The camp was now home to 7 cadets, a diverse mix of species, each with their own skills. Some had injuries, some had exhaustion etched on their faces, but all had found their way to Camp Chillax, whether by accident or design. Marcus had begun to delegate tasks, slowly allowing the cadets to take on more responsibility. Rasha was tasked with foraging and guiding the others through the jungle, teaching them how to avoid predators and identify safe plants. Talk, the chervil, was an expert at building and reinforcing structures, and he had taken it upon himself to improve the walls of the shelter, creating a barrier strong enough to ward off smaller predators. But despite the outward calm and productivity, something was brewing beneath the surface. Marcus could feel it. Every night as he lay on his cot, his thoughts would race. There was an underlying tension in the air that he couldn't shake. The wildlife had become increasingly hostile and their food sources were beginning to dwindle. The lush environment was beginning to show its darker side. And then there was the issue with Camp Gritfire. The rivalry between Camp Chillax and Camp Gritfire had started as a minor irritation, one cadet, Jarek, setting up a camp just outside their borders, claiming to be a true survivor. Jarek's camp was a stark contrast to Chillax. It was barebones, designed to test the limits of endurance. He had no fire, no shelter. His cadets were forced to sleep in the mud, their meals consisting of whatever they could hunt or forage. The idea, as Jarek put it, was to prove that survival was about enduring hardship, not about making things easier. For Marcus, that philosophy didn't make sense. Survival wasn't about suffering, it was about ingenuity, about adapting to the environment and making it work for you. But Jarek didn't see it that way, and the more time passed, the more hostile their interactions became. The rivalry escalated to the point where Jarek began to send his cadets to interfere with Camp Chillax's operations. They sabotaged food stores, set traps near the camp, and even tried to steal the resources Marcus had carefully cultivated. For a while, Marcus tried to ignore the disruptions, but it was becoming impossible to turn a blind eye. Tensions were rising, and not just between the two camps. One afternoon, while Marcus and Rasha were out gathering wood, they returned to find a group of cadets huddled around the central fire, speaking in hushed tones. Marcus's gut tightened as he approached. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice steady but low, betraying his unease. Talk the chervil looked up, his eyes were narrowed, his posture tense. "Jarek's crew, they've been getting bolder. One of them tried to steal food from the kitchen." Marcus's jaw clenched. "I thought we had an agreement, no stealing." "We did," Talk replied, his tone sharp, "but they're desperate, they've run out of supplies." "I don't care how desperate they are," Marcus said, his voice firm. "They crossed a line." Rasha stepped in then, her eyes meeting Marcus. "We can't keep letting this go, they'll keep pushing, testing our limits." Marcus exhaled sharply, running a hand through his wet hair. He didn't want to escalate things, didn't want to get into a fight, but the situation was spiraling out of control, and if it continued, it would tear the camp apart. "What do you suggest?" Marcus asked, turning to Rasha. "We have to confront them," she said quietly, face to face. Later that evening, Marcus gathered the camp around the fire. The flickering light illuminated their faces, all weary from the long days of labor but still hopeful. He could see the anxiety in their eyes. They all knew what needed to be done, but no one wanted to be the one to pull the trigger. "We need to make this right," Marcus began, his voice steady. "Jarek and his crew have been testing us, trying to undermine everything we've built here. They think they can survive by brute force, by doing everything the hard way, but that's not the way we operate here. Camp Chillax isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We're going to face them, not with force, but with what we've built here. We're going to show them that survival isn't about punishment, it's about working together." The cadets exchanged glances, a mix of apprehension and determination. They had become a family over the last few days, bound by shared effort and a common goal. They weren't about to let some misguided rivalry tear them apart. "Let's go," Marcus said, nodding to Rasha. "We leave at dawn." The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke through the thick canopy, Marcus, Rasha, and a small group of cadets made their way toward Camp Gritfire. The jungle was eerily silent, as if it too was waiting for the confrontation. When they reached the edge of the clearing where Camp Gritfire had set up, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Jarek and his crew were gathered around their fire, their eyes narrowing as Marcus and the others approached. Jarek stood up, his arms crossed over his chest. His camp was as barren as ever, with only the faintest signs of shelter, a few hastily constructed lean-tos and a pile of scavenged materials. "So you finally came," Jarek said, his voice thick with disdain. You think your little camp is better than mine, don't you? Marcus met his gaze, refusing to back down. This isn't about being better, it's about respect. You've crossed a line, Jarek. And what are you going to do about it? Jarek sneered. We're surviving, you're playing house. This isn't a game, Marcus replied, his voice calm but firm. And we're not playing at survival, we're making it work together, something you wouldn't understand. For a moment there was silence, then Jarek's expression twisted into a scowl. You think you're better than us because you built a little paradise for yourself, he spat. We're not weak like you, we're strong. Marcus stepped forward, his eyes hard. Strength doesn't come from suffering, Jarek, it comes from adaptability, from working together, that's why we're still here. The jungle was alive with noise, the Grothar's roars, the crashing of trees, and the frantic movements of the cadets within their shelter. The vines had done their job, entangling the Grothar's massive legs, but the creature was far from defeated. It snarled, thrashing in a desperate attempt to free itself, its clawed feet digging into the earth, pulling up roots and dirt in a frenzy. Marcus gripped the edge of the shelter, his knuckles white. The vines creaked under the strain, but they held, for now. The cadets inside the shelter huddled together, silent but alert, their eyes wide with fear. Talk's massive form towered in the corner, his spear raised and ready, but Marcus knew there was no way they could face this creature head-on. If the trap failed, they'd all be dead. We need to finish this, Marcus muttered, barely audible over the sounds of the creature's thrashing. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, and the clock was ticking. The Grothar wouldn't be trapped forever. Rasha's voice broke through the chaos. Marcus, it's weakening, we need to move now. He glanced over at her, catching the urgency in her eyes. She was right, this was their chance. The Grothar's thrashing had slowed, and the vines, though sturdy, were beginning to snap under the strain. If they didn't act fast, they'd lose the upper hand. Everyone get ready, Marcus ordered, his voice tight. We're moving out, stick together, if we get separated, we're done. The cadets nodded, though their expressions were a mix of fear and determination. Marcus could see the tension in their eyes, but there was also something else, something he hadn't expected to see: trust. They trusted him, and that was all that mattered. As the Grothar continued to struggle, Marcus signaled for them to move. Talk led the way, his spear held tightly in his hands. Marcus followed, keeping an eye on the Grothar. The creature had stopped thrashing for a moment, but it wasn't done. Its enormous head snapped around, fixing them with its glowing eyes. It let out a deep, guttural growl, the air vibrating with the force of its voice. Rasha moved next to Marcus, her hand resting on her knife. We're not out of this yet, she said quietly. Marcus gave a brief nod. I know. The group moved as one, inching their way toward the edge of the clearing, the shelter now a distant memory. The Grothar's claws scraped against the dirt as it fought against the vines, but the trap was still holding, just a little longer. They had to get to the trees, high ground, safety. Suddenly there was a loud snap, followed by a shrill screech. The vines had broken. The Grothar lunged forward, roaring with rage as it ripped through the last of its restraints. Run, Marcus yelled, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that they couldn't outrun it, not with the Grothar's speed, but they could get to higher ground. They sprinted through the jungle, pushing past ferns and thick vines, dodging trees and rocks. The sound of the Grothar's pursuit was deafening behind them. Its massive feet thundered against the earth, growing louder and closer with every passing second. They reached the base of a steep hill, and Marcus turned just in time to see the Grothar break free from the remnants of the trap. It let out a final, bone-chilling roar and charged toward them, faster than Marcus could have anticipated. It was close now, too close. Split up, Marcus shouted as he pushed Rasha toward a large boulder ahead. Take cover. The cadets scattered in all directions, diving behind rocks and trees, doing their best to stay out of the creature's line of sight. Marcus ducked behind a large tree stump, his breath ragged, his heart racing. He could hear the Grothar's footsteps, feel the ground vibrating under his feet. It was only a matter of time before it found them. He pulled out his knife, the one he'd used to craft tools and prepare food. It was far too small to face the Grothar directly, but it was all he had. Suddenly, Talk appeared beside him, his spear raised. We fight, he said simply. Marcus met his gaze. No, we survive. But it was too late. The Grothar had found their hiding spot, its eyes gleaming with malice as it charged, snapping trees in its path. The cadets who hadn't found cover in time were forced to scatter again. Marcus didn't hesitate. He darted forward, grabbing a thick branch that had fallen nearby. Distract it, he ordered, his voice hard. Talk nodded and lunged, his spear aimed at the creature's underbelly. The Grothar howled in pain as the tip of the spear pierced its tough skin. It swiped at Talk, sending him flying into a tree. Marcus didn't have time to check if he was okay. The Grothar was now fully focused on them. Rasha, Marcus called, his voice desperate. The trap, we need to finish it. Rasha, who had been crouched behind the boulder, stood and ran toward the clearing. She grabbed another set of vines, her hands moving quickly as she began to loop them around a nearby tree. Marcus sprinted toward her, barely dodging the Grothar's claws as it slashed at him. He reached her just as she finished tying the vines. Now, Marcus shouted. Together they pulled the vines taut, creating another makeshift trap. The Grothar charged again, its jaws wide open, but Marcus had planned for this. He had one chance. With a snap of the vines, the trap was set and the creature's legs were ensnared once more. It howled, struggling, but this time it wasn't getting free. The Grothar slammed its body into the earth, but the vines held firm. It roared one final time before collapsing to the ground, its massive body twitching. Marcus and the cadets gathered in the clearing, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The jungle had fallen silent once again. The tension in the air was palpable as the cadets stood in the clearing, catching their breath. Their eyes darted nervously toward the still form of the Grothar, its massive body slumped against the vines that had trapped it. The ground beneath them, once a battlefield, was now eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. They had survived barely, but Marcus could feel it in his bones. This wasn't the end of their trial, it couldn't be. And then in the distance it came again, the low, haunting hum of a ship's engines. The sound grew louder, more distinct, reverberating through the jungle. The faint rumble carried with it a sense of finality, an ominous reminder that their time on this planet was running out. The examiners are here, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of both relief and anxiety. Rasha, standing beside him, looked toward the horizon, her glowing eyes narrowing. They are coming for us, she said, her tone uncertain. But this test is not over, is it? Marcus shook his head, his mind already racing through every possible scenario. The Grothar was dead, but that didn't mean they had passed. The exam was about survival, yes, but it was also about ingenuity, leadership, and teamwork. And in that regard, there was still more to prove. The cadets gathered around him, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. They had fought for their survival, they had built something from nothing, and now they were about to face the final judgment. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This was his moment. The decisions he made in the next few hours would determine whether everything they'd done would matter. We need to make this right, Marcus said, his voice steady though his heart was pounding. We've survived, we've built something here, we didn't just wait for extraction, we made a home. We worked together, adapted, and fought back. We showed that we can not only survive but thrive. Talk, the towering Chervil, nodded, his voice deep and thoughtful. We have made a place where we belong. Marcus smiled, though it was tinged with uncertainty. Exactly, and when they come, we show them that we didn't just survive, we succeeded. The hum of the ship grew louder still, the shadows of its engines stretching across the jungle floor as it descended. A massive shadow loomed over the clearing, cutting through the canopy above. It wasn't just any ship, it was an inspection vessel, sleek and imposing. The cadets stood at the ready, tense but resolute. A soft hiss broke the air, and the doors of the ship opened with a mechanical whir. The examiners stepped out, three figures, their faces obscured by their helmets, each belonging to a different species. Marcus stood tall, stepping forward to meet them. The first examiner, a tall figure with shimmering blue skin and long, slender arms, spoke in a language Marcus didn't recognize. The translator embedded in his collar responded with perfect clarity. Cadet Marcus Adair, you and your team have completed the survival exam on G431. You are hereby summoned for evaluation. Come forward. Marcus glanced back at his team, his heart racing. This was it, the final test. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, with Rasha and the others following. As they approached the examiners, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, despite everything they had come through together. Your actions on this planet were unconventional, the blue-skinned examiner said, his voice cool and impassive. You were not expected to build, you were expected to survive, yet you adapted, built, and even formed a system of trade. You took a hostile environment and turned it into a sanctuary. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the judgment he had expected. We didn't just survive, Marcus said, his voice steady. We made it work. We learned from each other, shared what we had, and fought to stay alive. We showed that survival doesn't just mean waiting for rescue, it means working together. The examiner studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. You are correct, but there is more to this test than ingenuity and survival. We must now evaluate your leadership, the bonds you formed, and how you handled the challenges. The tension was unbearable as the examiners began to walk around the group, observing each cadet. Marcus stood still, waiting for the verdict, his thoughts racing. Finally, the examiner returned to the group, his expression unreadable. You have passed this test, he said. Your resourcefulness, teamwork, and leadership have shown us that humanity is capable of far more than survival. You've earned your place here, all of you. Marcus exhaled, the weight lifting off his shoulders. The cadets around him let out a collective sigh of relief. They had done it. They had not only survived, they had triumphed. But the examiner wasn't done. There is one final decision, he said, turning to Marcus. We are awarding you a special commendation. Your ingenuity in adapting the environment, building a self-sustaining camp, and fostering cooperation among cadets has earned you recognition. You are hereby granted Provisional Survival Instructor certification." The words hit Marcus like a wave. "Instructor," he repeated, barely able to believe what he was hearing. The examiner nodded. "You have shown the kind of leadership that transcends the test. You will be trained further to instruct others in the art of survival." Marcus stood there, his mind reeling. He had come to this planet expecting to prove he could survive, and now he was being recognized for his ability to lead. It was more than he had ever hoped for, and yet, in some strange way, it felt like just the beginning. Resolution. As the cadets were loaded back onto the ship, their bodies exhausted but their spirits high, Marcus reflected on everything they had been through. They had fought, built, and adapted. They had faced impossible odds and made it through together. And now they were going home. But not all of them. Marcus would stay behind, at least for a while. He had been given a new purpose, to teach, to pass on the lessons he had learned on G431M. His days of simply surviving were over. He had become something more, a mentor, a leader, a survivor who had learned to make the impossible possible. As the ship ascended, Marcus looked down at the planet below, the jungle where they had fought for their lives. Camp Chillax, now a symbol of their triumph, faded from view. But he knew something that no one else could see. They had built something that would last. They had taken chaos and transformed it into something beautiful. And that was the true victory.